All right, so I thought of a couple more things to do in order to exploit the players who are not shoving or raising their good up and down straight draws. One is that when we bet and they do shove, we want to bluff catch less wide against their shove. And the reason why is we've removed those draw hands. So let's say we have a hand like, top and bottom pair or bottom two pair, right? And we bet and they shove, and then we're like, oh man, this against their entire value range, we're behind. Against their bluff range, their up and down straight draw range, we're not in great shape, but we might need to call just because they could have those hands. Well, if we remove those hands from their shove range, obviously those hands become easier folds. The next thing I would do is actually test the limits of how small of a c-bet size we can have in order to realize equity without getting raised, right? So essentially this is kind of like we're dictating the bet size that we're comfortable paying in order to buy the next card. So let's say we raise and the button calls, or a better example is we raise and let's say the hijack calls. Okay, let's say final example. We raise the cutoff calls, button folds, and it comes Jack 10-6. We raise from the hijack, cutoff called, Jack 10-6. This is a board where we may expect our opponent to have King Queen, maybe occasionally Queen 9, 8 9. All of these hands we're a little bit concerned about, if we c-bet them ripping on us and us not realizing our equity. But if we're playing against an opponent who doesn't believe in raising these hands, who's going to play it more like they would in no limit hold'em, just kind of flatting on the flop with these hands rather than pushing that big equity in short deck, then we could get away with, we could start to test with how small of a bet we can get away with in order to get to the turn. So when we have a hand, even a hand like Ace 10, for example, right, which is just middle pair, not much going on, are they just going to still call our bet if we bet 1/4 pot, 1/3 pot, 1/5 pot, right? The smaller you can bet and see calls from hands like an up and down straight draw with 8 9, then in the future that you can get away with buying that turn card very, very, very cheaply. That's something that it takes a lot of hands to develop, that type of read on your opponent. It would be much easier to get that read on an opponent if you're playing online heads up, for example, rather than if you're playing Ring Live. All right, what about against a player who doesn't really semi-bluff with their pair plus gutter hands, right? Let's say they're a no-limit hold'em player. They're like, oh, well, look, I got a pair, that showdown value. I'm going to check it back. Maybe I'll hit my gutter on a future street. I don't want to get check raised, right? This is very no-limit hold'em way of thinking and playing pairs plus gutters. Instead of in this game just realizing that, equities could change so fast, your pair likely is not going to successfully make it to showdown by itself, and we want to be putting very many of these hands into our bluffing range or semi-bluffing range. How do we play against somebody who doesn't do that, who just checks back? Well, again, a common theme here is we're going to be able to realize more equity against these players. So when they enter the pot, we just want to loosen up our limping and raising ranges a little bit because we're going to realize more equity post-flop. We also want to fold tighter when they do bet on boards where most regs would bet the pair and the gutter, where they may not, right? Because their range is going to be weighted away from those pairs and gutters and weighted more towards made hands. What's an example? The 8 Queen Jack board is a board where, you'd see strong short deck players, you'd see your Durs and your Jungle Mans and your Bandziakowskis betting their Jack 10s, their Jack 9s, their 8 9s, 8 10s, all those kind of hands. If you're playing against a player who says, well, I got the Jack 9, I'm just going to check back because I got middle pair for showdown value, now we can fold tighter to their continuation bet on this board. Another example, of course, is the 9-10 king. On this one, you want to be taking hands like Jack 9, Queen 9, 10 Jack, Queen Jack, or Queen 10, and bluffing with those hands against players who don't have that strategy. We can just play a little more fit or fold on these type of boards. And of course, 8-10 Queen qualifies as well on this board. Hands like pocket nines would be a great hand to bet on a semi-bluff, or pocket jacks, 8-9, against players who have the hand like Jack 8 here and just try to check it down. Well, those are the guys who, when facing a bet from them, they're much more likely to have it. We also want to barrel more often on blanks when our opponent check calls. So because a lot of people would be, let's take this last board here, the 8-10 Queen. And let's say, our opponent raised on the cutoff and we called the button, and then they checked and we bet here. Let's say we bet with Jack 7 and they called, right? A lot of players in their shoes would choose to continuation bet as a semi-bluff, a hand like Jack 8 or a hand like 9-10 or all these hands. But because they're not continuation betting those hands, those hands are in their check call range instead. So when the turn comes a blank, let's say it comes a 6, we want to continue to barrel here because this actually weakens their check call range a little bit. And we also want to not stab on a complete bluff as often when check to on these boards. So a lot of times on the 8-10 Queen board, our opponent raised and they check to us, and we can just bet, relatively small size and take it because they would have c-bet anything that connects with this board, that at least has a pair plus a straight draw, or at least a straight draw, whereas these type of opponents who are taking a more passive line with their combo draws, they're going to check call those hands, so we're just going to get fewer folds here. So, on that 8-10 Queen board, we got the old Ace 6, let's just check back instead of stabbing.